So without further ado, let's get our opening keynote interview underway and find out a little bit more about Riverford Organic Farmers. It's known for its UK-wide organic vegetable box deliveries, and although it's an actual farm in Devon with a restaurant and 2 more sites in Peterborough and Andover in Hampshire, it's actually known across the UK. The company was founded in 1987 and became owned by its 800 employees 31 years later. Although 87 doesn't seem like it was 31 years ago, does it? About 31 years ago. It became employee owned on the 8th of June 2018. Quite a recent change then. I'm delighted to will be speaking with the founder of Riverford, Singh Watson. But in the meantime, we have its long-standing Director of People and Culture, Charlotte Tickle. Hello, Charlotte, how are you?
Morning, Penny. Good, thank you.
This is the wonderful thing about employee ownership, isn't it? You might be missing your founder right now, but you can step in, it's fine.
Yeah, I feel like I have lived and breathed this for the last 4 years since we planned the transition. So hopefully I can stand in for him while they try and get him on.
Brilliant. Well, we'll talk about the transition in just a moment. But first of all, I say you're a long-standing Director of People and Culture. I'm sure that won't mean long-suffering, will it? Just tell us a little bit about your role.
Yeah, so I'm Director of People and Culture, very much led the transition into employee ownership. Started 4 years ago, really, for me, because we planned the transition to move into employee ownership 2 years before we did it, if you like. So yeah, if you asked me the long-suffering question 4 years ago, I might have given you a different answer to now. It was a challenging time, but I do feel really proud of where we've got to now, 2 years on into that employee ownership journey. But yes, so my role was very much. Sorry, Penny.
No, carry on. I'll try not to interrupt you. Because it is interesting. Like you hear a delay and go, oh, what did you say? What did you want? Do carry on. Long suffering? 4 years?
No, I was going to say I very much led that transition into employee ownership. It wasn't just the employee engagement side, but the legals, the governance, kind of really understanding what we needed to do to make that transition, and then working hand in hand with Guy to understand what he wanted from that transition into employee ownership, and how we could structure it, not only for all the future co-owners, but for Guy as the founder too.
And what was he telling you in those conversations? Because you must have had many conversations. It's not just one diktat from above that goes, right, Charlotte, make us EO and get on with it, and then it's the end of it. What did you interpret Guy's motivation as being when he wanted to become EO?
And it's tricky. So Guy spent 10 years really thinking about employee ownership, and I remember talking to him about it actually probably along back at that time, and we were looking at cooperatives, all sorts of different models, and went to visit some other businesses. And in the end, he felt employee ownership was the best model for him and the long-term protection of the business. And talking to him to understand what he really wanted, it was about protecting his legacy in the best way and everything that he'd built in the business. And I remember him saying to me, it's like this monkey on my back, that it's my baby that I've carried around with me since it began. So that sense that the business was his baby, was his child, and he really wanted to protect it going into the future. And he was absolutely adamant he did not want it to fall into the wrong hands. So he didn't want it to fall into venture capitalists or the wrong person that was going to strip away the values and everything that he'd built up in the business. So it was really to protect it from a sale, to really protect those values in the business. And I think employee ownership for him was a proven model that allowed those things to happen. And I think he felt like the people who'd worked in the business right from the beginning were, they were the safest hands to put it in. That's what I think he would say.
But they knew the business best. I'm going to ask you about structure and what the choices were when you first were faced with this opportunity to transition. But first of all, just explain to everybody what Riverford is and does? Because there's a restaurant as well, isn't there, as well as it being a national delivery site, but you grow vegetables, tell us the whole thing.
Yeah, so it's actually quite a complex business that many people probably don't realise. So we've got about 850 co-owners in the business now, and we do everything from growing the produce to packing it to sending it out to the customer's doorstep. So very vertically integrated, touches lots of different parts of the supply chain. It's organic veg boxes and organic fruit and veg extras directly to customers' doors. So farming, kind of production, manufacturing, the last delivery mile. And then, like you say, just to add a little bit extra, we've got a restaurant. We've also got a small wholesale business.
It's one of those things, isn't it? It's like, oh, we're having a success, but let's just add some more onto our plate, literally. But sorry. Is that a success? I mean, it must have had it's mothballed for the last few months.
Yeah, we have had to close it. It's been a really challenging time, and I appreciate we're in a really good position compared to many businesses at the moment, but we have had a challenge with closing the restaurant. And actually this shows actually what employee ownership brings, that flexibility. So we've had an amazing response from co-owners. So the Field Kitchen, for example, have gone out doing community work. So with our local communities, which is something that we've wanted to do more of, cooking for a homeless charity in our local community, and Exeter Food Cycle, which again, cooking for the homeless. And they've used their skills to teach those volunteers how to cook with our veg, which was sometimes a bit of a challenge. So they've turned their hand to that. And we've had a sales team, which we also had to close down early on in the pandemic, who said, what can we do? Where can we help? We don't want to be furloughed. And we were desperate for drivers, and we really needed support for the driving team. So all of those face-to-face turned their hand to driving. So I think what employee ownership has showed us, we knew this already, but during the pandemic, was that flexibility that you have and that desire to do whatever's right for the business and support it through this time. So yeah, we've definitely seen that.
And unlike many businesses, Riverford didn't furlough any staff. And in fact, it's grown, its sales have grown, rocketed, I'd say, since the pandemic for the obvious reasons. But how has EO managed to adapt to that? And so I mentioned in my introduction about, McKinsey and Company mentioning how resilient and creative and, fast turnaround time, people just stepped up basically during the pandemic. Has EO given you an advantage on that, do you think? How have you fared against your competitors in the market?
I think so. And it's been an incredibly challenging time, probably different to some, I appreciate. But we have seen incredible amounts of demand, particularly during lockdown, and we've had to make tough decisions to look after our existing customers, over new customers, and to reduce our product range significantly to make sure that we focus on the things that we do best, which is, fresh fruit and veg. So we've had some tough decisions around that. But I think what we have done is really focused on communications, really focused on keeping people informed, because things change every week, and we've made sure we stay connected. So our co-owner councils had a really big part to play, I would say, in the last 7 months, really not just representing their constituencies, but bringing perspective, making sure we're connected as a board and a senior leadership team to the business, and that we know the things that matter. There's been a lot of anxiety that we've been able to support with communications, with working with managers, to make sure that we weather this time. And I think as a result, we've seen incredibly low absence, people self-isolating. We've often had to encourage people to go, that have got underlying health conditions, and to shield where they need to. So I think you see that kind of wanting to be here and not let teams down and not let the business down. So yeah, I think that answers the question.
I mean, I'm not a farmer, right? But I'm guessing the summertime is a kind of busy time in the fields, as well as throwing a pandemic into the mix, as well as throwing extra demand. I mean, we haven't really got onto the structure question yet, and I will do that, but I'm just fascinated about how you've managed all of that with communication, how you've enabled it, and has EO played that big part in that? What have you been doing on the ground to make sure all this happens?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it has been an incredibly challenging time, and we've dealt with an enormous amount of change. So what we've also seen is jobs that people have had for 20 years, we've had to adapt, and some of those jobs have changed. And I think that willingness to do that and support the business, so employee ownership's definitely supported there. I think in terms of communications, again, we've really had to talk about. We've had to respond to those government announcements, and we've tried to be front of foot. So to try and predict that, we've gone above and beyond in terms of the support that we've offered for co-owners, and very much kept in our mind our objective that, you know, we really want to be an exceptional place to work, an exceptional employee-owned business. And I think what we see, and what I've seen in the last 7 months, is more challenge. So what you get from co-owners is they will challenge. If they think we're not making the right decision for customers, they will voice it. When we hadn't expanded the range, and we had quite a reduced range, that co-owner voice through the council and just through general discussions in the business that we needed to expand that, and we needed to do a bit better for our customers. So I think that challenge from co-owners, and the fact that everybody holds those values and is thinking about the business, what's right for the customer, what's right for Riverford, and the long-term performance. We've definitely seen more challenge, I think. And it's not, so employee ownership is about, you know, we are held to account by the trust and the co-owners within the business, but it's not this sort of slinging mud at each other over the fence. It's very collaborative. And you do, and we've seen that, you know, yeah, in other businesses, and we really didn't want that. So we've worked really hard to make sure that the trust, the board, the co-owner council work really closely together and support each other and have open discussions, and that we're really transparent. So I think that's what we've tried to do in the last 7 months, is be really transparent about stuff, even when we don't know the answer, and to share stories. So what we do a lot, and I know my engagement lead would talk about, is telling stories within the business. So it's not all about the messages that we cascade, which we've done every week, the key messages through all our channels, lined everything up. Managers have then supported that. But we've also allowed co-owners to tell stories that support those messages, and to bring things to life. So what it's been like for drivers on the ground at the moment, you know, and how hard they've had to respond. And then, you know, or people working from home. So we've got a really challenging situation where we've got some people in the business working right now, packing, delivering. And then we've got a lot of people who've been sort of liberated to work from home, or forced to work from home, should I say. And that divide between those that feel they're working really hard in the business with those that are currently working from home. So we've worked really hard to bridge those divides by also telling stories of what it's like for people working from home, which isn't all a bed of roses right now, and actually is quite monotonous in many ways, lack of social interaction. And we've supported co-owners a lot with a lot of wellbeing initiatives, and really supported people's mental health through this time wherever we can.
Yeah, challenging, and then challenging anyway, and then a challenge on top. But of course, you know, away from the pandemic, there's Brexit coming down the track anytime soon. So all businesses are having to prepare for challenges, no matter what they are. I mean, the pandemic has just been an extraordinary one. So let's get back to basics then. Let's find out how Riverford is structured. You mentioned there's trustees, and there's a co-owner council, and of course the board. But how did you set off? What were the choices in front of you for anyone who's on this event who's going, EO sounds interesting but really complicated? Can you walk us through those first steps that you took? Was it looking at legal, governance, the shape of the future?
And you know, Penny, I really wish I'd had a one-sider of the things that you need to think about when you go into employee ownership. because it does feel really blooming complicated when you start. I honestly didn't know where to start, and there was all this sort of stuff, and it was really challenging. But actually, once you know it, it's actually not that complicated. And the legals and governance is the easy bit, I would say, really. So yes, actually, the first thing that I did was pick up the phone to the Employee Ownership Association and ask them if they could give me a couple of businesses that we could go and visit. And I think that was the best thing we did, actually. And it's the best advice that I can give, is to go and visit some other employee ownership businesses. So we met some that had a trust set up, and we met some that had a direct ownership set up. And I think by doing that, we avoided a lot of the pitfalls that we potentially would have gone into without doing that research. So take that time, talk to other businesses, and understand what worked and what didn't. So that was the first thing and the most important thing. And then, yeah, like the beginning big things to think about are, what structure do you want to pick? Do you want to pick that trust model, like John Lewis as an example, or direct ownership model, something like Ripple have, where you have a direct stake? And then to really understand from the founder to decide, how much do they want to sell? Do they want to sell more than 51%? Do they want to sell it very slowly over time? Do they want to retain any shares? And what are their ambitions around that? And I think then really thinking about what is special about this. What is the narrative that you're going to tell your future co-owners about why this is special and what it means for them, what it means for them on the ground day to day. So they would be my top three.
So you really had to think ahead of what the shape of this would look like to future co-owners, employees, to describe it to them and tell them the story of it. That was in your mind at that point, was it?
Definitely. And I think there's a real tendency with employee ownership to want to get on with it. And, if you just think about the legals and governance, of course, you can transition probably in 6 weeks if you wanted to, same time as selling a house, maybe. But I wouldn't recommend it. But then we had some work to do. Actually, what this did for us was forced us to look at our culture. Riverford was great in so many ways, but we still had work to do. And I was very conscious that I wanted the culture to support that transition going into employee ownership. And we had a little bit of work to do around that. We had a little bit of old command and control style management, and we had to work through that. Otherwise, I think we risked future co-owners being really disenfranchised when we transitioned and feeling like nothing had changed. So I think the risk without thinking forward is that you transition and it feels like nothing changes, and that can take quite a long time then to work through to make it feel different, is my view, but that will be different for different companies.
And we've had an audience question, not necessarily deeply on the structure, but obviously co-owner councils are a massive part of how you communicate and how you operate. And what are the different types of co-owner councils that you have? That's from Dawn Dublin, alliterative name, beautiful. What are the different types of co-owner councils that you have? And then I believe that we can introduce Guy, who's arrived. We've found the founder.
Good. Yeah, I could talk about the setup of the council probably all day. It's its own kind of discussion. But yeah, we have a formally elected council. So everybody stands, which is slightly unique setup. We did that because we felt that often those that wouldn't put themselves forward are those that are best represent other people, because it's not just about them and their voice. So yeah, everybody stands, and then we create some theatre. And I think with employee ownership, you do need to create some theatre to bring it to life. So we do a big thing around elections and election time. It's going to be a challenge this year because we've got to do it virtually. But we put up, marquees and proper voting boxes, and we're really clear about what the role is and what the council is set up to do, so people know what they're voting for and whether they want to stand or not. We have a group of about 25, and they have certain powers which are actually enshrined in our legals, which we were really keen to do early on. But fundamentally, their role is to challenge and hold the leadership team to account, but also, as I said, to bring perspective and make sure we're aware of the things that really matter on the ground. And that's been really effective and working well during COVID. But it's taken a long time to get there, and we've still got teething problems. We do have an external chair also running that, which I think helps. But again, there's a decision about how you can chair, whether internally or externally. Hopefully that answers the question.
Well, it just sounds like you've got a lot of creative opportunity when you decide to go EO, and the looking at yourself, holding up the mirror, are we a good enough culture at the moment in order to sustain this, are really good probing questions that most businesses should be asking anyway. But EO maybe gives you that kind of line in the sand to go, right, from this point, we're going to change, we're going to do some different stuff, and it's going to be better, and a really good offering for the future generations that will own this business. But I'm delighted, Charlotte, thank you for that. And I will be back to you in a moment, obviously, and we've got lots of audience questions coming through. But I'm delighted to say that we've got now Guy Singh Watson on the line. Guy, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, and it's fantastic to see you, because I do have some specific founders questions for you. Charlotte talked about it being your baby. Riverford was your baby. From 1987, you founded Riverford Organic Farms and turned it into a massive success. And then 31 years later, handed the keys of it over to 800 other people. And I'm just wondering about that moment in time for you. Can you remember the day it happened, or was it a bit of a blur? What's the feeling of doing that?
Well, I did get very drunk.
The baby and going out into the world now.
Yeah, it is a blur, because I did get very drunk. I mean, we had a big party, and you know, I have to say, it was, I think, so far, it was probably the best day of my life. I mean, you know, which is a bit difficult for my previous wife and my current wife, because it did probably top my wedding day. And it was, as you say, a very personal creation, and it did feel like my baby, like one of my children. And I did feel, you know, like all parents do for their children, I did feel very, you know, I'd cared for it and raised it, and I really cared about its future, and I wanted it to be sure that it had a secure future. In fact, I do remember telling the lawyers that to sell it would feel like selling one of my children into prostitution, which, when I was selling it at that time, that was selling it to a venture capitalist group of business people that I don't have a lot of time for. So yeah, no, and you know, that really led to employee ownership.
What were your fears if you were to just sell it? Like, most businesses do just get sold either to venture capitalists or private you know, one other owner. What was the problem for you there?
I think we'd built a brand which people trusted, and I thought that would be exploited. I'm pretty sure it would have been exploited. You know, to continue the analogy, it would have been raped by a load of voracious capitalists for the gain of the shareholders, and bugger the customers and the people who work within the organisation. So, you know, I do feel very angry with the world, and I probably shouldn't be so angry, but at 60, I'm still angry with the assumption that we're all motivated by money, and that's, you know, the prevailing organisational principle that we organise ourselves on. It's just a lie. You know, we're all, most of us, you know, are much better than that and capable of much more noble behaviour. And I guess I wanted to leave Riverford in a hands where that could be demonstrated, where we could demonstrate, albeit in a very tiny bit of the world, that there was a better way of working together. You know, something that, as I say, was more noble than just appealing to people's personal greed. And whenever I have, you know, we've had performance-related pay and bonuses and so on in business, to my mind, my observation, it's always been a disaster. That is not how you get the best out of people. You get the best out of people by sharing in the values and goals and mission of the organisation, by giving people as much autonomy as possible, and by giving them the opportunity to learn and improve. And that's something that I really see over the last Well, certainly the 2.5 years since we became employee-owned, but I think Charlotte, I didn't hear all of what she said, but I think to say that we still had a lot of work to do with our culture was a bit of an understatement. We were, our culture left a lot to be desired, and a lot of that came back to me and the way that I hadn't really expressed or demonstrated, the culture that I wanted to see inside. And I just basically didn't even, I had the intellectual, philosophical aspirations. I just absolutely did not have the skills to be able to turn those into a culture, which is, something that Charlotte and her team and the coach and the learning and development manager that, have all contributed hugely to.
Well, that's quite a big admission from a business owner. I dare say, well, the numbers of business owners I've met who wouldn't have that self-awareness. But I would imagine there were times when it was a bit of a slap round the face or a bit of a shock to realise that the culture perhaps wasn't as you wanted it to be and perhaps could be improved upon when you set out on this journey. What sort of external support do you have in helping shape and change the old command and control board into more egalitarian employee, sort of level playing field for everybody? How did that work for you as a person?
Well, the first thing was for me to express clearly, what it was that I was after. And, I've been running a business for 28 years and I thought surely people understood what it was that I wanted to achieve. But, when I started writing it down in the founders' wishes and discussing it and presenting that to people, it became apparent. Even the senior managers and board, I hadn't really got it across to. So I guess, the old adage, assume nothing, makes a fool of you and me, is very, very true. So that was absolutely instrumental. Having done that, you can then use that as a framework for your legal structures and indeed to instruct and inform, the people that we internally and externally who were going to work on that culture. I was aware that there was a lot wrong with our culture and we had made attempts to address it in the past, but, with nothing like the skill and nothing like the required resources and nothing like the patience, actually, it takes time to change these things. And again, referring to what Charlotte was saying, I think going into employee ownership, the most difficult thing for most organizations will be culture. And don't expect to change it overnight. I would say 3 years. We spent 10 years thinking about it and slowly sort of edging towards it, and then probably an intensive 2 years working with, I'm not sure what Charlotte's covered, but we had an external coach who was absolutely brilliant, who started with me and the board and has worked sort of down through the organization and has, with the support behind her, has brought about some, incredible changes, changes that, really it makes me very happy to see. I mean, far happier than, looking at 20 million pounds in my bank account, which was the alternative.
And are the 800 employees? Sorry, go ahead, Charlotte.
I was just going to say, Penny, I think that point about where culture's involved, starting at the top, and Guy was part of this as well, but with the leadership team, really working with them because they have to model the way. But it was about putting people at the heart of the business as we went into employee ownership. And we did work through the organisation, through all the policies and learning and development and all the things Guy's talked about, but fundamentally it was about working with the leadership team and then working with managers who actually had the biggest fear, I think, as we moved into employee ownership. They were the ones that were most concerned about what it meant for them.
I mean, we did.
How did they voice that? Go on, Guy.
I assume that we would lose quite a lot of middle managers. That was sort of what we were advised by other employee-owned organisations, that they were the ones who would find it most difficult. Because, let's face it, I mean, their sort of power base is based on, knowledge and information and decision making, and you're asking that to them to share that and actually to take pride in what their teams achieve rather than in what they have personally, they can claim as being their achievement. And that's a huge, huge change. And I thought it was likely that we would lose quite a lot of those, little Hitlers. But actually, it's just extraordinary how so many people embraced and welcomed the opportunity to learn. And, this idea that, learning something that you do when you're young. You know, I'm 60 this year, and I am just loving learning new things. And I think, you know, the co-owners are finding the same. It's a tremendous opportunity to increase your skills, you know, things, you know, human skills which you can apply at home as well as at work. And you know, I think it's been tremendously exciting. I would say to the huge majority of co-owners to have that opportunity.
And I would just add to that, Penny. Sorry, Penny, I would just add to that and say, I think for us, the challenge, you know, the reason we didn't lose a lot of managers was because the challenge was they didn't know what good looked like. So I can imagine lots of cases where I'd had conversations with managers saying, just tell me what I need to do. Just tell me how I'm a good manager and what that looks like. And then I realized that we had different challenge, and they needed to visualize that, and they needed to really think about, you know, their behaviours and what good management looked like. And that's where the work with the coach that we mentioned helped kind of shaping that and bringing the values and behaviours to life, and what it meant for them day to day.
If I can butt in, Charlotte, I thought, you know, absolutely a key thing was acknowledging that it wasn't just about the numbers. I mean, that is part one in the founder's wishes, actually, that, you know, that you can't measure everything with numbers, and in a very sort of macho culture, that tends to be the way things are looked at. If it's not measurable, it doesn't exist. And you know, and to sort of, so it's not just, clearly we do need to achieve the numbers. I mean, we're not profitable and we don't satisfy our customers, we'll be nowhere. But you know, it's how you achieve those numbers that leads to, in the long term, being able to deliver them, you know, 5, 10, 20 years down the road. If you can get those numbers, you know, with respect and sensitivity and compassion for the people who are working around you, that is a much more sustainable position than you know, really sort of beating your staff into submission or bribing them with the carrot of a bonus or a productivity bonus. You know, although the benefits of that sort of management are very, very short-lived and ultimately self-defeating, and you know, getting them, you know, to understand and share in the purposes of the organization and to really maximize their contribution to achieving those goals through their own skills and learning and ability to make decisions. You know, that's how you achieve, you know, real ongoing performance. And I don't know.
And I think, like we said,
yeah, our performance is fantastic, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I was just going to say, you know, managers, it is about making people feel good about themselves. That's the realization that we had. It wasn't about, and the amount of conversations we had with managers, that it was about getting the job done. It wasn't about people. It was somehow that I don't have time for the people management side. It's a kind of sideline thing. But actually, once managers realise that that's what being a manager is, you know, making people feel good about themselves, listening, creating that culture for new ideas and encouragement. That's what the job of a manager is. And I think once they'd started to understand that, and we'd moved it away from kind of abstract stuff into something practical, that's when they really got it. And as Guy said, most of those managers are still with us. We did have some casualties along the way that couldn't come on this journey, didn't want to, and I think that's okay. And as Guy said, I really believe, you know, the work that we've done on culture over the last 4 years, our transition into employee ownership, is a result of why we're performing so well. I'm not sure there's a lot else we can put it to, you know, not just in terms of sales, but in terms of profitability, our contribution overall, that it's all really improved. And I think that's what you were going to say, Guy.
It is, yeah. I mean, I think, Charlotte, I think you should, I don't know, put some numbers out there. I mean, about the staff as well, you know, you know, I don't know if you want to share them.
I was going to mention, actually, about you two. We had a conversation about 3 or 4 weeks ago to prepare for this event. And what struck me about you both was, unlike most other business interviewees, and, you know, I've interviewed many on live television, national radio, that sort of thing, the numbers are always first. Not EO businesses, I have to say, but the numbers are always first. The profit, the growth, the sales, the turnover, the absences, that sort of thing, all sorts of things that you can measure and manage in that old way. But what I also see is a lot of hand-wringing from organisations about the transition from a command and control through to an enabling and empowering culture. And the two sort of like can't be disconnected, but I think they tend to be when it comes to an EO business. So actually your numbers are front page headline news, frankly, in the business world, because they're so staggeringly impressive during a pandemic. I mean, Charlotte, tell us what they are, because, well, let's start with the absent rate for a start, because that's impressive.
Yeah, I mean, the absence rate has been below 1% during this time, and that includes everybody who's been self-isolating. And I think that's as a result of what we talked about earlier. People want to be here. They don't want to let their teams down. They want to ensure the business success, whether they're drivers or they're packers or they're working from home in the office. So we've definitely seen the benefit of that. And actually, we have gone above and beyond on those policies and said we will pay people in certain situations. So they could have taken the piss out of all of that, but they didn't. And I know, maybe 4 years ago, it would have been, God, if we do that, everybody's going to be off and no one, it doesn't happen. And we're really careful. So those policies, those decisions we make should be for the many people that absolutely want to be here and do the right thing, not writing them for the few that will test it, because they are in the minority. So I think it's worth remembering that. And I think employee turnover is the other figure for me to mention. We were at 40%, when we talk about the cultural challenges, it came through in the turnover, and that was costing us big time as a business. I would say 40% turnover of staff in an industry like ours is massive. And I think we're going to be at 12% this year, which, we still have hospitality in there, which is high, and our sales teams, but it's getting much better, and it just feels like a different place. It honestly feels like a different place to what it was 4 years ago. And it does for me too, actually. And our kind of focus on making it a great place for everybody that's working here. And as a result, that is seen through the numbers. So I think we're 40% up on sales compared to last year. And we've smashed our profitability top. We had some completely what we called audacious objectives for 2023, which was to hit a certain level of profitability, and we've smashed it basically already. So now we're going to have to think about some new ones and set some new targets. Anything you'd add, Guy?
No, I think that pretty well covers it. I mean, the thing about not getting obsessed by the numbers, Penny. I mean, clearly numbers matter, and without them you won't survive. But I've always felt I could get a better indication of where the business was going to be in 6 or 12 months' time by looking at the people's faces in the canteen than I ever could from anything my accountant could tell me. The businesses are about people. They're almost all. My dad taught me that, 50 years ago, and don't ever forget it. You won't get those numbers without the people, and that's what the FDs tend to forget. And of course, people are sort of can be difficult to manage. They can be unpredictable. They can be emotional. All those things which people who put numbers in spreadsheets don't like very much. But I mean, that's the reality of the human condition. And if you're a manager, get used to it.
Okay, good. Now I'm going to hit the audience questions now, because we've had loads and loads and loads. So bit of a quick fire round. Some of them will take a bit longer to answer, but one of the most popular questions is, Guy, this is to you, and I was going to pick up on it before because you mentioned about your wishes and desires. Now, founders' wishes are something that's really important to an EO business. We're going to hear later on this week about an EO business that didn't have those in place, and it sort of backfired a little bit to begin with. But what are founders' wishes for those of you who are new to EO, and what were yours?
They are, I suppose they are how, as the founder, you want to leave the business to be run by, in future generations. So, lots of great examples. You can John Spade and Lewis, or I particularly like Ove Arup's one from Arup Engineers. So there's some very dated and sexist things in there. I think there are a lot of really great stuff in there as well, some of which I borrowed. But I think really, as a founder, owner, trying to really distill what it is that's important to you. I mean, that can be quite a kind of soul-searching question, and what it is that you want to achieve with your life, what you want to be written on your gravestone, so those are the sorts of questions, and then it needs to be turned into a language that a lawyer can, help turn into, the shareholders' agreements and all the other legal bits and pieces. And then it has to be communicable. It has to mean something not just to you, but to everyone else as well. And for me, I did that by presenting it to initially the directors and senior managers, and then about 20 or maybe 30 times within the organization to different groups, and just watching them as I was talking and getting a feeling for what gelled with them, what was significant, what was irritating, what was irrelevant. I did drop one or two, but I think it is important that it was my document in my language, but it was my language having listened to other people, which is generally not something I'm very good at, but having really, tested it out on them. And I did it by actually just drawing images on bits of old cardboard and holding them up and talking about them and using it in a very sort of, rather than doing a PowerPoint presentation. I don't know, that seemed to sort of engage better. And anyway, so that's what Founders' Wishes were for me. And I do think it's incredibly important. That's probably too long an answer. I'll shut up.
That's good. No, it's great. If you do want to look more into Founders' Wishes, check out the Founders' Wishes on the Riverford website, but also Arup, you mentioned there, has got Founders' Wishes. Any EO business, I would have thought, would make them available on the website. So maybe copy and paste is what Guy did, outside the sounds of things, from other people's, and build your own. So we've had lots of popular questions. So this is the other most popular question. How have you balanced the need for, this is from Ian Hiscock Consulting, how have you balanced the need for leaders to take quick decisions with your desire to engage and involve employees? So I think this is an on the ground question about, if you need to make a quick decision, do you have to go then to a council? Do you have to involve a load of committees? I mean, there's a fear there, isn't there, about EO with that? Charlotte?
I'll start. Yeah, so actually this was one of the biggest fears and things that we talked about. So this sense that you have to gain consensus and vote on every decision. So we have a very conventional setup that the board runs the business day to day. It doesn't need to go out and gain consensus or get a vote on every decision. And actually even employees back then were really concerned. That was one of the main concerns about employee ownership, that it will slow down decision making. And we had to dispel that myth that it's not about gaining consensus. Of course, there are times you consult and you engage and you share your vision and all of those things, but the board has to be let to run the business day to day. But of course, we have to expect, if we make a crappy decision or something that doesn't make sense, that we're going to be held to account for it. And I think that works really well. So I think it's that difference between consultation when it's appropriate and consent. Would you add to that, Guy?
I just to second what Charlotte says, it was absolutely the fear, on the shop floor, which with incredible sophistication. I mean, I think most managers and owners really underestimate their workforce, because the level of sophistication that they showed in these discussions about our kind of constitution was extraordinary, and that was one of them. They were worried that it was going to become cumbersome, and then at the top, in particular Rob, our managing director, but also other senior managers, there was this phrase that went around: we're going to drown in consultation. It was really doing Charlotte and my heads in a bit, I think. But right in the run up to actually signing the documents, this was the last sort of spasm of fear. And it was very quickly dispelled, actually. I think under our current structure, we are making better, safer, but overall faster decisions than we were pre-EO. It absolutely does not need to slow things down. And being able to go and consult with the council when we, often they bring stuff that we just, our world is different, as senior managers, and to get an input from across the organisation has actually been invaluable. And I can't really think of anywhere where it's, indeed, if you're giving people power and autonomy to make decisions locally, that's quicker. I mean, as Charlotte says, they still have to be accountable, but I think we become much more forgiving of mistakes, and there's less of a, if you get it wrong, you're fired culture, which encourages people to take risks. And, in a world that's changing as quickly as our world is, you've got to be prepared to take risks. And so I think it has speeded up decision making, actually.
That must be music to people's ears, actually, because that is obviously, as you say, the last sort of spasm of fear. Another question that's very popular on the list: I'd love to know how Riverford got the wider team on board with EO, because they are given that you're split over so many sites, you've got people in fields, people in head office must feel very far away from each other in many aspects. How did you manage to engage them on EO? Did you bring them along in the journey on the first place? We had a comment actually from someone who said they spent 18 months just talking about the EO options with them. Is that part of how you worked it?
Charlotte,
Let's start, Guy. Yeah, don't get me wrong, it was a challenge, and it is the biggest challenge, but yes, we did involve them right from the beginning. And actually there was one early challenge where we couldn't decide on the structure. We couldn't decide between trust and direct ownership, and Guy sort of chucked it out there that we should go and ask the then employees, but I was very conscious we didn't want to ask people to vote on something that they didn't understand. So but we did involve them in that, but that meant really educating a group of people on employee ownership, the different pros and cons of direct versus trust. I probably guessed by now that we went for the trust model. I don't know if I said that, but yeah, we worked really hard, as Guy said, for Guy to get in front and share the values and the founders' wishes, but also for Rob, our MD, to give comfort that he was going to protect those values and that it wasn't all going to walk out the door when Guy left. And we talked to co-owners about, what were their hopes for employee ownership. And I think, that's when we realised we had a little bit or a lot of work to do around the culture with some of those hopes that were coming through about sort of listening, comments around my manager. So we absolutely engaged co-owners and worked really hard at that, and then did lots of theatre around it, as I've said, and built up to a big celebration on that transition day, of which we had nearly all co-owners turn up and celebrate that. What would you add, Guy?
Wow.
Well, I would really encourage, we set up a kind of interim, at that point, staff council to debate some of these decisions, including the structure, whether we went for a trust or direct ownership. And again, they were to some extent self-selected, the ones that were interested, but also a little bit sort of co-opted. And I guess you could look to the Citizens Assembly, which is a system of decision-making, which I know Extinction Rebellion, but other organisations are looking at. And I think it's a brilliant model that you get people together who are broadly representative of the constituency that you're representing, and they receive representations on the possible actions and whatever, and they make recommendations to the ultimate decision makers, who were still the board. But to be honest, the board couldn't make up their mind. I couldn't make up their mind whether to be direct. The direct ownership seems to give a more entrepreneurial, dynamic culture, which I was very much attracted to, but appealed to. But it was fundamentally less fair and a lot more cumbersome and involved a lot more administration. And I, I'm so glad that we went through that consultation, because I think we may well have made a mistake without it, actually. And so you need to engage. I really would urge, we've been around quite a number of employee-owned organisations, and the ones who have imposed it from the top down, I mean, in some instances, staff barely knew until they were all called together and told that the business was becoming employee-owned. I mean, that's just absurd. Don't do it. Whatever the circumstance, if anyone's thinking about it, go out and spend months, if not years, talking to the people who are going to be affected by this. But, do not rush into it. Whatever your circumstances, you're going to make a cock up of it. And Charlotte and I have seen that happen a lot, actually. And this is going to sound arrogant as hell, and I wouldn't normally say this sort of thing. I think we've done an absolutely exemplary job of it, because we have been patient, and some of that patience has been forced on us. I mean, we started looking into this in 2005, Charlotte, and then we had the recession in 2008, and then we had various IT failings, which just forced us to, we had to focus on other things. But actually, I think it was a very good thing. I mean, I think in those 10 years, I grew up a lot and knew what it was I wanted to achieve. We got much better at consulting, and actually Charlotte, grew into her role as well, and was able to, because it was a very challenging, managing this transition in the culture was, really an extraordinarily demanding thing to do, I think. Yeah, so I can't say that be patient I can't say it firmly enough.
What support did you have, Charlotte? That's one of the questions we've had, is did you have any external or internal support from anyone during this time?
Yeah, and early on, I knew I needed help, to span the size of business that we were, and because we, particularly with our operational managers, some of them will be listening to this, they were a tough nut to crack in those early days. This had been their train set for a long time, and they did not want to change the way that they managed, and a lot of that was because they were frightened of how and not being able to do it. So yes, I engaged somebody. Actually, she is local, but she was from London, and fundamentally she's a coach. But we ran collectively some leadership sessions, but we started with the board, as I said earlier. They were really challenging, and we kicked off with some 360-degree feedback sessions. So we each gave each other feedback. We got feedback from our teams and other people in the business, and she produced a report, and it was like a mirror, basically. And there was great stuff in there, and then there was stuff that was incredibly hard to read for myself too, and we had to all accept that we had work to do, and there was things that we started at the top, so getting that leadership buy-in, because I remember early on actually sitting in a session with our senior leaders, and they would say, yeah, we do need to do some work with the managers over there, and we do need to do some work with them over there, and that kind of lack of acceptance that it's about and what can I do to change this, and what can I do to support my teams and encourage my teams to manage in this way and move on this journey, this cultural transformation that we were on. And they all had to think about themselves and how they influenced their teams to do this. And that was fundamental, but that was the biggest trigger, I think, that we had to switch. So yes, worked with someone externally, and she supported me as a coach as well, which was much needed over those years.
Good. And Guy, a very popular question for you. How has your role and involvement in the business changed since handing over to 800 others to help run Riverford? Have you got your feet up a bit more?
I don't really know how to put my feet up. I spend more time out in the field, so I'll be going and planting some trees after this, and that's what I really enjoy doing. That's my kind of incubation time, I suppose, is where my thoughts develop out in the field. So I really enjoy that. I've never been great at running a big organization. I hate systems. I'm pretty anarchic in my approach. People find it really difficult to work with that. I'm pretty disorganized, as evidenced by the fact that it took me 20 minutes to get on this call, I think. But, so actually it suits me very well. I mean, I get to come in and, kick the tires and occasionally get upset if I think we're heading in the wrong direction on something. And actually, I get to encourage people and facilitate other people to be useful, which I never thought I would acquire the skills for that. I mean, God, I wish I'd learned them earlier in life. But I've really enjoyed, seeing how I can encourage other people to achieve, what they want to achieve in life. And that's been tremendously rewarding. So I mentioned this thing about, you're never too old to learn. And I have really enjoyed that. I am a little bit alarmed by how quickly I've stepped back and how happy I am to step back. I think it's all okay. I mean, I still feel, passionately about the business but I do have this thing, and it's maybe a bit childish, that if I can't get my arms around it, if it's not mine, then it's someone else's. I mean, actually, I don't think I'm the best person at sharing stuff, despite the fact that I say that's that's how we should be willing to live. I'm actually having to learn how to do it myself a little bit, and when it's someone else's, I tend to walk away and say, well, you get on with it, then I'll go and do something else, which is a little bit what I'm doing. But I still think I am contributing to the business through through bringing a bit of wisdom, actually, and a bit of years, and questioning the board on things. And rather than saying what I want to be done, it tends to be more asking questions and maybe a little prodding, and just occasionally having a tantrum. My main bit of coaching at Stanley was that I should be less frequently gratuitously offensive, and when I was, I should have apologized immediately and publicly. That was one of my first lessons, and my God, it's instead of getting angry about something and sorry,
has it paid off? That's amazing. What insight?
Yeah, no, it really has. I went for a walk with the coach, and she pointed out one or two instances where this is how I've behaved and suggested how I should behave. And the next time I did it, I sat, I felt the hairs standing up on the back of my neck, which is what happens. And then I have a tantrum and an outburst in a meeting. Quite often it's because I'm bored. And then I realised that I'd just been a complete prick, and I apologised, and everyone sort of around the table thought, oh my God, what's happened to him? Because they'd got used to, we don't have to be locked into these patterns of behaviour, some of which are really sort of damaging. When you got it wrong.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that, Guy. I really am. We've got another couple of minutes, but I really want to just ask, and you're going to like this question. We've had it from Lisa Fryer, who says, your drivers are brilliant, brilliant ambassadors for your company. How do you manage recruitment? Does EO help you with recruitment? Do you position yourselves as, is it part of the USP to attract talent? And are you likely to face a challenge with a shortage of skills in the field with the Brexit situation on the horizon?
You, Charlotte.
Yeah, do you know, I think this is an area we could still do more. I don't think we do make enough of employee ownership in our recruitment. And I don't think it's that well known still. So a lot of our candidates haven't heard of it. So I don't think we're getting as much value from the recruitment as we could. Can't remember the other questions, but yeah,
how do you get those brilliant drivers? Do you pick those drivers for the fact that they are likely to be great ambassadors for your business, or are they just really chuffed to be working for Riverford and therefore are great at their job anyway?
We've got a real mixed bag actually with our drivers. Many of them have had incredible jobs in their past, lawyers and solicitors, and that then come to do this because they want to do something worthwhile and they want to interact with customers and do something useful. But it is a really tricky one, this, because you need drivers that are great on the customer doorstep, but it's also an incredibly demanding job where they're doing up to 100 drops a day, so akin with kind of the multi-drop drivers. So getting that balance is a real challenge, and actually it's quite a topic for us at the moment about how we get that right.
Good. Okay, I think we're going to leave it there. We have had so many questions. I've been so delighted with them because they're so brilliant. I'm sure that if there's anything that's really sticking out, there's been a popularly voted for question that the event organisers can ask you for the answers at some point. We managed to get some sort of future interaction going somehow. I'm making promises that are not actually within my gift to give now, and it would be lovely to talk again sometime soon. I wish you all the best with the future and picking those sprouts for Christmas dinners. I'm sure I'm looking forward to getting those in my organic box, as it were. So thank you both very much, Charlotte Tickle and Guy Singh Watson. Thank you. I've really enjoyed that. I hope you have too. Thank you for all your excellent questions, audience members. They were brilliant. The next session at EO Boost is going also to be cracking. Gromit. It's the founder of Aardman Animations, David Sproxton, who's going to be helping you understand if EO is for you and your business. And hey, even if you are already an employee-owned business or part of an employee-owned business, it will be grand, won't it? A short break now from 10:30 all the way through to 11 o'clock, so plenty of time to go do the coffee and the networking, you know what I mean? You'll be back here with David at 11 o'clock. So click the next agenda item on the website and it'll take you straight through there. And I'll see you later for the panel discussion.